Hello and welcome to Building High Performance Cultures, a weekly series where we talk with executives from top organizations about how they built high performance cultures and how they're leveraging their culture as competitive advantage. I'm Marty Parker, the President and CEO of Waterstone Human Capital, and my guests today are the co-founder and CEO of ThinkData Bryan Smith, and the head of brand and culture, Tim Lysecki. Bryan and Tim, welcome to Building High Performance Cultures.
Hey, Marty. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Marty. Good to see you.
Great to see you both, and thanks again for joining us. Now, a little bit more background and information. Prior to founding ThinkData Bryan worked for the Government of Canada as a senior policy advisor to the President of the Treasury Board of Canada, where he helped implement the government's value for money ethic, leading to over $7 billion in annual savings and the first transition from deficit to surplus in the last 20 years. That's incredible. He's also a very strong supporter of skilled worker immigration, sponsoring many engineers and their families seeking Canadian citizenship. Equally as impressive, I would say. ThinkData employees speak over 20 languages combined and hail from countries all over the world. Bryan's also introduced a returnship program at ThinkData targeted at helping women re-enter the workforce after extended leave, a program he has challenged all startups and technology companies to adopt. As the head of brand and culture of ThinkData Tim develops the face of the company, directs media about the company and products, and helps to expand the client roster. And in his spare time, and you'll love this, he's an avid songwriter, performer, photographer, and interestingly, a budding baker. So there's a pretty strong right brain in there as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, Bryan, maybe we'll start with you. For people who aren't familiar with ThinkData tell us about the organization and about the culture that you have built there.
Yeah, happy to. ThinkData has been kind of a work in progress, I guess, like every company since our inception. And one of the things that we focused on since day one, and I think has sort of continued to develop both the company and our culture, is really our preliminary focus on making open data and public information accessible to companies and people who are trying to use it to build better services and use information to help people, basically. For those who don't know, open data is data that's published by governments. Mostly every government around the world does it at this point. They all do it in various ways and structures and formats, and it makes it really difficult to sort of plug into, even if you are a data scientist. The preliminary vision of the company was to help governments serve this up to the public in a much more digestible format so that we could kind of speed up the time to market for all this new public information. As part of that journey, I think transparency and making information just available has always been sort of the fabric of the company. And one of the things that I think has made us successful from harboring a great culture at ThinkData has been taking that idea of transparency and applying it to both how we grow the company with our own employees, but also just how we talk about what we do and how we try and share that message to the broader tech community as well. So I think, Tim will talk about the brand and culture and how we kind of mix these two things together, but really that whole open data transparency concept that we built the business on is something that we take and also apply to building a great culture at ThinkData
Terrific. Now, was culture something that you and your co-founder were talking about in the very early days of building the company, Bryan, or is this really something that happened more organically?
The short answer is organically. I think if you asked, hindsight's 20/20, but if you asked me 5 years ago what the hardest part about starting a company would be, I probably would have rattled off things like finding capital, landing our first clients, building a sustainable business, all these sorts of business related KPI things that, not that those are easy, but there's a lot of focus on that for what success looks like. Culture is almost an afterthought in a lot of these early KPIs about what success looks like. And I truthfully believe it's one of the hardest things to do and one of the most important things to do from day one. I think we got a bit lucky on the culture side because we had the ability to lean on the transparency principles that were being governed in the open data movement. So when we came up against difficult decisions about, how much should our employees know about what's going on, good and bad? How do we talk about a decision to focus on a good activity versus something that, may be in the gray zone? We were very diligent on looking at the transparency rules that were set in the public domain with governments and saying, hey, if we're going to be a company that operates in this space, we have to adopt these principles as well. And we sort of built that as the bedrock of the culture, and since then have kind of built it and evolved it on over time. But that framework started from day one with us, and that made it really simple to make decisions and grow the culture 3, 5 years, 6 years down the line. If we didn't have that, I think it would be a lot more difficult to be where we are now.
Now, Tim, your title in itself is more rare than common, although we've certainly seen it before in terms of being the head of brand and culture. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that, how that came to be, because you didn't start in that role or with those responsibilities. So maybe give us a little bit of kind of how that occurred and how that works well for ThinkDataWorks.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was brought into the company, we were sort of 17 people. We're just about 50 now, maybe a little over. And that was about 3 years ago. So it's been a rapid period of growth. I came on as a contract web developer, and that just sort of grew with the company as we focused on a lot of the marketing efforts on the website. That meant we needed to focus on what marketing was to ThinkDataWorks. And as the marketing department itself grew, that meant we need to focus on what ThinkDataWorks looks like from the outside. And looking at that, it meant we needed to find out what ThinkDataWorks looks like from the inside. So that's that intrinsic link between sort of brand and culture. Who we are among ourselves really translates to who we are out there in the public realm and with all of our clients and prospects. That really spills over into everything we do.
Talk a little bit about, and this is for both you, Bryan and Tim, the organization's approach to leadership communication and how you mentioned it already, foster transparency in the organization and do that, through communication as leaders.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that we find with a lot in the tech space and the startup space is this whole concept of like stealth mode and all these combat and military terms for how to grow companies. And from our perspective, that creates a certain type of culture that from our perspective is not the greatest one that we wanted to set up as a company, nor one that we wanted to think was the best way to kind of grow an organization. When we started the company in 6 years ago or whatever, that was really common. Was companies had to be serious, they had to be dark colors. You didn't need to know what they did, you just needed to know that they could do whatever you wanted them to do. And that was something we actively decided to push against and say like, hey, that's great for those companies if they want to do it that way. But from our perspective, being completely open is how we wanted to run the business. And as we grew, from 5 people to 15 people to 50 people or whatever, turning a structure from a flat organization into one that has hierarchy, especially in this new way that we operate businesses, especially remote now, makes it even more difficult. Transparency to us has just been the thing that's kept us all together because it enables us to all kind of follow the same principles of how we talk about things and how we keep each other in the loop. The lack of being able to run into someone in the office these days, because that's kind of the world we live in, means we lose those natural organic transparency opportunities that I think a lot of companies take advantage of, or don't really think of as a transparency opportunity, but it is at the end of the day. You talk to your coworker and they say something and it's like, oh, great, I'm working on something similar, maybe we should collaborate. Those things just don't happen in a world where we're all kind of plugged in online. So we try and counteract that, and the message and the direction we want to bring the company with the idea of just don't be scared to say what you're working on to anyone, because you never know where these connections are going to happen. And I think that's really how we've, from a leadership perspective, pushed the culture down into the teams. And what's happened is that's filtered back up, which is great. And that's really been a blessing over the past year, I guess, as we've all been kind of locked away at home.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we hit on for sort of all of our employees, we're still a small startup at heart, and ownership is a big component of what we like to instill in everybody coming through our doors. And that transparency just leads to that feeling of ownership. You're part of the process. You're part of these decisions. You're open to, bringing your voice to the table, because we do like to make sure that everybody gets that sense and that same pride, that same stake in our success.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we talked just a little bit earlier about, your brand and your culture, but you've really made, maybe I'll start with you, Bryan, or Tim, you've really made culture part of your employer brand. And maybe talk about why that's important, and possibly some of the ways that culture has really supported recruitment and even retention.
Yeah, for sure. The simplest answer is that when you walk into a place for an interview and you see a bunch of tired, stressed, unhappy people who look like they've been worked to the bone, everybody's going to be turned off of that, no matter what the pay is or what the perks are. We've really we do believe that attracting talent is about letting someone know that they'll flourish, and it's not just enough to take somebody's word for it in the interview. So seeing that when we're active on social and we're engaging in things like Startup Open House, which is a really cool initiative that launches in Toronto. We're really looking forward to that happening again once things are safe. We just like to seize every opportunity to show off who we are and what we're about, because we think that aspect is really key to attracting the right people, keeping the right people, and growing together as a company.
Thank you. One of the lines that caught my attention in your Canada's Most Admired Cultures Award submission is that onboarding means learning about the people, not just the job. Now, in my view, that says so much about your culture. And what I'm wondering is if either one of you or both of you can talk a little bit about that onboarding process and how you facilitate learning about the people as well as the role.
Yeah, I think, and this also ties to what Tim's been working on with tying our brand and culture together as well. I think this is all sort of pieces of the same pie or cake or whatever that saying is. But really it comes down to, we want to be as authentic as possible as a brand. And I think it's sort of a millennial thing to say that, and how important it is to people, both as a worker within the company, but also the people we serve as clients, or that we work with at these companies that kind of deploy our services. Is we know who we are. We're not trying to be something we're not. We may not be for everyone, but we're a bunch of nerds who get really excited when data gets released publicly, and we get really excited when people turn that into stuff. What we found really great about our recruiting process and how we bring like-minded people together is run them through a job interview like you would, but also there's a authenticity filter that gets applied to this when you actually talk to people about what they do. And when we support people within the company to be who they are and be open about what they're working on and what they're excited about, it allows people to just talk authentically about how they work, how they operate, and what we find is people really like that when they come and apply for the company, because you're talking to someone that isn't wearing a mask. You're talking to someone who's like, hey, this is what we do, this is what we get excited about, this is what we're looking for. It's cool if that's not you, but at least you know what we're looking for and how you fit in. And we found people integrate really, really well when we can kind of just get that set up properly from day one. And that's why we run an interview process where, you know, it's not uncommon for people to meet 6 to 10 people in a 3-phased interview process. And it's just as much for it's just as much for us to get exposure to a potential new hire as it is for the new hire to understand what they're going to get exposed to if they say yes. If someone comes in and they don't fit from a culture perspective or from a skill set perspective, we're not doing ourselves a favor either, right? I think all these things are social contracts between two people. We want to support our people and their growth trajectory just as much as we need them to support the growth of the company. If we're not aligned there, then you know, it's not good for anyone.
Got it. Got it. Well, it's obviously something that you've invested an enormous amount of time on when you go from 17 to 50 in 3 years, and you have what can be that many meetings. It's been a big part of a lot of people's agenda. We mentioned in the introduction the returnship program, which is, in my view, quite incredible. Tell us a little bit about that program, how it works, and the impact it's had on the organization.
Yeah, this is, I guess, a passion project that's turned into sort of something that we lean on pretty heavily and have had a lot of success with. I was kind of inspired to take a run out when a similar program popped up on Bay Street for the banks to do a similar type of returnship for the big banks here in Toronto, specifically in the capital market space. So I read about that, and you know, it's no secret that there's a massive problem getting equality in startups as well. And I kind of said to our team here, like, hey, if capital markets at the biggest banks in Canada can support a program like this, where the job is extremely intense and very, you know, personal and in person, there's no reason why a startup that has completely flexible hours, completely flexible workplace, can not have a similar program. And we looked around and we just saw that no other companies were doing it. So from our perspective, it almost became an opportunity to say, like, hey, there's got to be a bunch of really talented women out there that, you know, maybe can only work 3 days a week, or maybe can only work 4 hours a day because they have other things that they've got to take care of. We might be able to actually level up on our hiring by having the flexibility, as opposed to competing with the Googles and the Amazons of the world who are willing to pay way more money for senior leadership roles just because they're such a larger organization. So from our perspective, you know, there was the no-brainer of this program existing for a startup as sort of one part of this, but the second part was it's actually, and to this day, I believe, a strategic advantage to focus on these types of things and provide the flexibility. We've recruited much more senior, experienced women into these roles than we would have been able to if we were just putting out job postings. And that is the one thing that I find interesting about why returnship programs don't exist at every company in the tech ecosystem. I've openly challenged other companies to adopt it. We haven't seen a lot of pickup in it, which is interesting, but I mean, we've only had amazing success with it, and it's a great initiative to pick up without a lot of downsides, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that all of our returnship candidates have stayed on as full-time employees now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they enter typically as on a contract or as a part-time employee. You've had 100% retention of them to full-time. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't call it like an internship or a part-time or whatever. We leave it open-ended because we believe everyone's got a different situation. Like some people need, 3 days a week or 4 hours a day. Like it's really, let's build the position around you. We also look to focus on roles that we may not be 100% ready for as a company based on our side. So a good example is looking for like a chief marketing officer. We might not be at the point where we need to hire a full-time one, but as a returnship program, can we get someone in who's capable of doing that job for 4 hours a day instead of 8? And that program lasts for 6 months, they are ready to come on full time. Now we can just kind of roll them in as that full time role. So it's almost like a leading indicator for these larger director and VP roles, and that's where we've seen a lot of success as well. So yeah, I guess the challenge still exists. If anyone else wants to put it up, we've only had success.
Love it. Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's a ready-made kind of initiative to take for a number of organizations. I love the idea. Now, you also work with a lot of students and a lot of interns. And so I have to ask, what are both of you seeing when it comes to the next generation of leaders, and how are you helping to develop that talent?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, to be honest. We bring in co-ops, mostly from Ontario universities, but we're constantly and repeatedly amazed at the contributions they're making. Not just sort of following orders and falling in line, but coming up with really original ideas, really cool solutions, teaching our engineers a thing or two. And Bryan, we talked earlier on about social media. On our marketing side, it's been a huge advantage to have co-ops who are plugged in and have that sort of hands-on experience with social media, but also the know-how to back up these initiatives and strategic plays that they're making. And in terms of fostering that knowledge and development, we really do like to extend the same sort of autonomy that we do to our full-time employees, to our co-ops. We give them projects that they can own. Again, that concept of ownership is still very important to us. They're not just coffee runners, because we don't have space for that in our company. I'm sure there are internships where that's more or less what you do. But here you're in the trenches, you're getting your hands dirty, and I think they all sort of leave with a lot of valuable experience, and some of them don't leave. We've brought on a lot of our co-ops as well as full-time employees, so it's been great.
Fantastic. Now, where did your team at ThinkDataWorks focus on recognition come from, and why has it become core to how you work?
I sound like a broken record on the transparency front, but recognition comes by people delivering things that they own, and everyone knowing that they're working on it. And I think the recognition became important for everyone from, a salesperson closing a deal to an engineer introducing a new feature to the platform. Even to wrap on what Tim just said about our co-ops, we try and set up everyone here as an owner of something that will eventually come to an end, and you can look back on it and be proud of it. And I think this is one of the things that I took away from working in government was it's easy to work on 1,000 things in government, and none of them ever end. Most programs in the public sector kind of start and just continue. And it's really hard to look back and say, hey, like I did that, or I completed that, or this is better because we've done this. And with the whole recognition cycle that we try and put in on every aspect of the business, it really comes down to being able to take a step back and see the value and success of what you've done. And, that goes for being able to put something on a resume, to being able to feel satisfied at the end of the day, like, similar to the farmer plowing a field and being able to see that it's done. It's a lot more difficult to do that when we're all kind of plugged in on the internet and things are virtual, all the work we're building. It's a lot harder to take a step back and get the satisfaction. So a lot of the recognition is recognizing that something has been done, and we can take a moment to award someone for doing it. I don't know where that came from. That was definitely an organic thing, but it's really built into our culture and something we celebrate on a bi-weekly basis now. We used to do it on a weekly basis, but it started taking up too much time. So we rolled it into a larger meeting bi-weekly.
You're in an extremely competitive market. for folks. I mean, there's far more demand, really, than there are supply. So tell us a little bit about how Think Dataworks maybe differentiates itself within that marketplace to kind of the best and the brightest, which is really a challenging thing to do, whether you're 50 people, 500 people, or 5,000 people.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we, a few years ago when we were recruiting for roles at the company, a very common thing we heard in interviews was, hey, I'm considering this job, but I'm also considering a job at Google or Facebook or fill in the blank gigantic company. And, we used to take a really aggressive approach to that and say why we were better. And we, at some point we stopped and just said, listen, it's apples and oranges at the end of the day. There's people who want to work at startups and own things that are going to hit market. And there's other people who want to go to a large company and learn the process of how Google introduces a new call to action on a website. And, 100 million people might click on that, which is really cool. And there's a whole system in place to ensure that what's happening is the right way to do it. And that's a really valuable skill. But it's not comparable to the skills that you can pick up owning things at a smaller company. And at the end of the day, that's a decision for the individual to make, not a negotiation that we enter with a person about what they want to do. And I think that comes back to the culture discussion and meeting people within the company, because we openly talk to our candidates about what they're going to own and what it's going to look like and who they're going to work with. And that's a decision for them to make. Do I want to take a product and bring it to market and get that experience? Or do I want to go work in a large organization and understand the operations of a feature implementation for, a platform like Google? Sure. And it's different, I think. So what we do now is just clearly lay out that's the decision. It's not our job to convince you one way or the other. It's your job to decide what you want to do. And that's been really helpful. We've actually probably gotten people to choose us over larger companies by taking that approach, rather than trying to give them a list of reasons why it's not a good idea to go to Google. Because, it could be a great idea if that's the type of person you are. So it's not our job to tell you otherwise.
Well, you're doing something right with that amount of growth for sure. A question for you both, and that is, what has the past 12 months taught you about your culture?
I think one of the fundamental sort of takeaways is that the times when it's hardest is the times when you need it most. I do some meditation, and that's as true as it is for our culture. When you're at your most frantic, that's when you need some time to slow down and just be for a bit. So in a world where we're all separate, remote, we're all getting that same Zoom fatigue. It's tough, but it's also the time when you need to be most active about reaching out, most active about engaging, most compelled to bring your team together around, activities, whether they're social or, business related. We've really had to work hard to adapt, not just the work, but the culture as well. We recognize 100% that we've been really, really fortunate in our position as a company, where when things slowed down, we got 5 times busier than we ever have been. But you can't motivate a team by calling out that we're fortunate for 13 straight months, So we've really we've been tested, but also it's taught us that we're a really close-knit group who's able to handle these challenges. We're quite flexible in this regard, and I think our continued growth has just been evidence to that fact.
Tim sort of hit it. I think it's a resiliency exercise for your culture. At the end of the day, that's how I would describe the past 12 months. We had a good framework and we spent a lot of time nurturing it. And I think that's created a fortified situation for us from a culture perspective. And we've been pretty blessed in that regard. I think, you know, I'm a big proponent of, we as humans, you know, we create energy by existing, and we usually have a lot of outlets to kind of send that energy, good or bad. You know, your home life, your friends, your activities, your hobbies, and work being a pretty massive one for a lot of people. What we've seen over the past 12 months is, as all of those kind of outlets shut down for people, a lot of that energy gets channeled through the workplace, just because it's the one outlet that's remained open through Zoom and online. Right. And what we've been doing a lot with our employees is just working on a constant recognition that work is an outlet, and how people feel and what they're dealing with isn't necessarily related to work. It's just the outlet that a lot of this energy is going through. A lot of our younger employees would be going out and blowing off steam at the bar with their friends or whatever, or going to do some sort of group sport activity, and those things just don't exist anymore. But that doesn't mean we're not creating that energy that usually goes in that direction, right? So I think a lot of our culture shift over the past year hasn't been a shift on how we manage and define our culture. It's been a shift on constant recognition and exercises of, you know, constantly reminding ourselves of gratitude. But that's been more important, I think, over the past little while than big culture changes. And we've got to rely on the culture citadel in the center to kind of hold the fort and just provide the support mechanism for everyone. But that's kind of been, I think, from my perspective, the big change and the big challenge.
Well said. Let me ask you both, you know, what trends do you foresee coming in building or sustaining high performance cultures now that we've had 12, 13 months really of a very different set of circumstances? How will that affect the future, and what do you think is coming down the pipe in terms of being able to build and sustain high performance cultures?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern is that I think it's easy to do remote business as usual. It's difficult to do strategy remote, where that's going to be an interesting hurdle that companies are going to have to get over. We're looking at changing our entire workplace to a attractive place for people to come together and solve problems. Having a nice desk at the office is not a perk anymore because everyone has a nice desk at home. But having a place to collaborate and having a reason to come to a safe and secure space that's shared with people you trust through whatever network you create or are a part of, I think is going to be a big trend.
In terms of broad trends, I mean, Bryan mentioned earlier that sort of old world mentality of wringing out your employees and squeezing them for every drop. And there's been a renaissance in the last few years of sort of a bigger focus on culture and employee satisfaction. And I think initiatives like, you know, making the office less of an office and more of a clubhouse, those kinds of things where it's employee enablement, where we're bringing real flexibility to our employees. That's going to be major because, you know, the better somebody's engaged in their whole work experience, not just the work that they do, but everything around it, the happier they're going to be and the more productive they're going to be. Like you know, it's good for people, it's good for business. So that's where I'm seeing things trend.
And I love the whole idea of bringing the home into the workplace, making it feel like a club, giving people a reason to want to collaborate, innovate, and be together, of course, when it's safe to do so. And I think you're right, because there's going to be a lot of organizations just say don't need the office. It's an expense. It's no longer a strategic weapon, and I'm with you and think it is. So let me ask you both one final question. And that is, what's one piece of advice that you give to a young person or a new leader or someone who's just starting out on their kind of high performance culture journey? What would you share with them? Maybe I'll start with you, Tim, and then we'll finish with Bryan.
You can have a good culture without a good company, that's very much a thing in some places. You'll never have a great company without great culture. Those cracks are going to turn into fissures, and that's going to split your whole thing wide open. The real longevity of your business will come from the people that you're building it on. And you've got to make sure that they're cared for, heard, engaged. That's really what will help you scale.
Awesome. Bryan?
Yeah, I think my one piece of advice would be culture is your identity. We spend a lot of time as entrepreneurs or fresh startup folk talking about our companies, and our true market fit is the classic term that we hear. What's your true market fit? Who are you servicing? All these sorts of things. And I think we spend less time asking those exact same questions to us internally. Who are we as a culture? And if we think culture is, if you agree that culture is your identity and that's where you're going to get the most success, those same questions need to apply to how you grow a business. And I think that's where we found a lot of success, is just be who you are. It doesn't, I'm not saying you got to be a transparent, open company where everyone talks. You could be the exact opposite. And that's fine, as long as you acknowledge it and know it and focus on building the culture with people who share those common beliefs. We get into this supply and demand world with even looking at employees as resources as we grow companies. And it's like, you got to get as much talent as you can in the door and, figure it out that way. We've always taken the approach of, talent's great, but talent without culture fit is not as great as talent with culture fit. And if we can be a bit more patient and a bit more structured, we're going to get larger results out of people who fit both into our vision and our talented folk. And they exist, and it takes patience, and it takes time. But as soon as you start building that out, the culture will start flowing out of the organization, and it'll be like a magnet to the people that you want to recruit on a go forward basis. It takes time. And, in this world, a lot of people don't have time and patience, but if you get it right, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, listen, and it sounds to me, based on the growth, how you're doing things, and the fact that you're bringing in such great talent in innovative ways and keeping them, that you are doing just that. And I think you said, Tim, you can have good company with good culture, but you can't have a great company without great culture. Is never truer words have been said, and that alone is great learning. And I think today the whole idea of kind of the alignment that you have kind of programmed into the business between your brand and your culture, and the things you are doing as a result of that, whether it's as innovative as Returnship or as simple but hard to execute day in and day out, of great recognition, particularly through these great times, and onboarding, and really just caring about people. And I think what we're going to see is a lot more great things out of ThinkDataWorks into the future, because frankly, you understand that great culture builds great business, and it is good business. So just absolutely delighted to have both Bryan Smith and Tim Lysecki of ThinkDataWorks with us today. Really appreciate all your time, gentlemen.
Hey, our pleasure, Marty. Thanks so much for having us. We're obviously still thrilled to be a recipient of the most admired corporate culture. So thanks again.
Yeah, happy to talk about this stuff. It's super important. So thanks for the platform to get the message out.
Delighted to do it. Thanks to Bryan and Tim and everybody at ThinkDataWorks for lending them for a little bit of time today. And join us next week for another episode of Building High Performance Cultures. And in the meantime, if you want to learn more about the subject, please go to waterstonehc.com.